Yes, as a baby, as a child in the manger. And we reflect on that. We think of gift giving because we think of the gift of Jesus to us, arriving as this young child. But the important thing about Advent is realizing where we live right now. Yes, we're in Advent season, but the rest of our lives is truly between two Advents. We are living now in the time after the first time Christ came, the first Advent. And ahead of us in the future is the second Advent, when Christ will appear again and he returns. When Christ appears, when he returns, and that second Advent, that second arrival, it'll look much different than that first one. And that's what I want to introduce our Advent season now, is we'll be looking at different ways that the Lord has prepared his people and is preparing us and sent his messengers ahead to prepare God's people for the first time Christ came. Let us enter into that time first thinking about the Advent we're looking forward to. We as a church, as Christians living after Christ has come, are looking ahead to when he returns, when he appears again on clouds of glory. So let us focus on that second coming, the greatest time of wonder that we will ever experience. One of the passages here that I wanted to read from is in Mark 13. We'll start with verses 1 through 2 and then jump to verse 24 to the end of the chapter. And as he, that is Jesus, came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings." And Jesus said to him, "Do you see these great buildings? There will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." And verse 24, "But in those days after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will be falling from heaven. The powers in the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. And then he will send out angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. From the fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as its branch comes tender and puts out its leaf, you know that summer is near. So also, when you see these things taking place, you know that he is near. At the very gates, truly, I say to you, that this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But concerning that day or that hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Be on guard, keep awake, for you do not know when the time will come. It is like a man going on a journey, and when he leaves home, puts his servants in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to stay awake. Therefore, stay awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening or at midnight, or when the rooster crows, or in the morning, lest he come suddenly and find you asleep. And what I say to you, I say to all, stay awake." This is the word of the Lord. I want to relay to you something that has happened in Jerusalem. A quote from an eyewitness here about the end at which Jerusalem came to by the madness of those that were for innovations. A city otherwise of great magnificence and of mighty fame among all mankind, and truly the very view itself was a melancholy thing. For those places which were adorned with trees and pleasant gardens were now become desolate every which way, and the trees were all cut down. Nor could any foreigner that had formerly seen Judea and all the beautiful suburbs of that city now saw it as a desert, but lament and mourn sadly at so great a change. For the war had laid all signs of beauty quite waste, nor had anyone who had known that place before had come on a sudden to it now, would he have known it again. No, this is not a news story you missed in the last week between the truce between Palestine and Israel this past week. This is not something that happened in the last 2 months of the war going on there. But it sounds like something that would likely happen. It happened in AD 70, about 40 years after the events of this passage, after Jesus is talking to his disciples there, when he says, "Not a stone upon another that will not be thrown down." 40 years after that, Emperor Titus of Rome marched into Jerusalem and laid the place completely waste, as those words from Josephus relate to us. Josephus was a historian of that time period, a Jewish historian who saw the horrible things that had happened in Jerusalem, everything torn down. It was tragic. It was horrifying. It's that kind of scale that we've seen in Israel in the past few months and Palestine the past few months. It was horrific. But the interesting thing, and the reason why I bring up a quote from an old historian of an event from almost 2,000 years ago, is to relate to you also that that was not the end. It was huge and it was climactic, especially for the Jewish people. But it was not the end of things. Jesus is talking about, in some ways, the end of the temple in Mark 13, but he's also talking about the end of time as he returns. He's talking about both kind of events. And I set the stage for us there today because this passage, Mark 13, is one hotly debated among Christians. I even debated, do I really do Mark 13 for this passage on Christ's return? Are there simpler passages? Because this is not a simple passage to study. Because some historians, some scholars who look at this and think all the events that he's talking about in the whole chapter are completely future from us, and that the disciples will never see any of it or experience any of it. There are others who say that every event, even the passage we read today of verses 24 and on, that those things also happened in AD 70, that in a kind of more spiritual way, the Son of Man returned in AD 70. So it's kind of a range of what we think happened here. And I believe in my study that there are two events he's talking about. He's talking the passage we didn't read as much, verses 3 to 23. I believe that's talking about the future event for the disciples, but historical event for us, AD 70, when the temple was destroyed. Now, and why that is because the disciples are talking about the temple. And he immediately starts talking about this horrible thing that will happen, which would be referring to the temple when it in fact was destroyed. So he's answering their question there, but they're also asking, but when will you return? They're also asking, when will all these things be accomplished? What will be the signs? And so he then talks about his return in verses 24 to 37. An event, first of all, the destruction of the temple, that many of them would see, but they would not see the return of Jesus. And for us ourselves, that's why I want to focus on verses 24 and following. Because that's still something we must keep awake. We must watch for. But I'm spending all this time talking about AD 70 and talking about the temple. Why? Because I think it really frames what we are supposed to have our marvel and our wonder and our awe-inspired looks at. The disciples are focused on the glory of the temple. And Jesus says that will come down in time. That wonder itself will fade. That beauty will be destroyed at some time. But what we should never lose our wonder of is waiting for that day of Christ's return. We must keep awake and watch for that. Wonder at what Christ has done and what he is coming to do. The whole talk about the temple is important because this first point, he wants them to see of what things we tend to wonder at, tend to be inspired at and marvel at. In the beginning of Mark 13, as they came out of the temple, and the disciples say, "Look what wonderful stones, look what wonderful buildings." And Jesus said to him, "Do you see these great buildings? There will not be one left here, one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." The second temple, that's what was the first temple. The Solomon's temple was destroyed by the Babylonians. Hundreds of years before, about 500 years before these events. But Herod's temple was the second temple, and it was a really great achievement for the Jewish people then. Is that understand what the temple means to the Jewish people. It's not just great architecture and beautiful architecture, but it was the jewel of Jewish identity, of worship, of reverence, of the opportunity to gather together and walk up towards the Temple Mountain filled with awe and approach. The sense as if you're drawing closer to God himself and him coming to you. It's not the sense we get as you march up the steep steps to this space here today. It was beautiful and sound and didn't have a leaky roof in the back by the tech booth like we had this morning. It was glorious. And so you can hear the disciples looking at Jesus, who's a godly teacher, who must, of course, have such awe and respect for this godly building, right? And they say, Rabbi, what do you think of this place? It's pretty amazing, right? And Jesus is almost like checking his watches to say, like, well, how much time does it have left? It's wonderful, but it'll be torn down brick from brick. And he spends the next few verses giving this prophetic testimony of what will happen in the next 40 years as it is destroyed. It's important for them to hear that because they need to realign what their wonder is. Is it the building of the Lord, or is it the Lord himself and what he's coming to do that they're supposed to wonder and marvel at? There are temporary structures, if you will, that capture your awe and your wonder. I'm not just talking to anyone who's like a big architecture fan. We're not just simply talking about buildings, but institutions, but people. And all those things eventually do fade, fall down brick by brick. The wonder and beauty of youth will age out. The wonder of athletic talent and vocal performance, those skills reach their zenith as well in time. You think of perhaps the greatest temple in the state of Wisconsin, Lambeau Field. That will one day find its fate and lose its battle against time. All things that we marvel and wonder and have great pride in and great hope in will fade and will crumble in time. And this passage, though, particularly, I think, struck me as a pastor because he's talking about a beautiful place of worship, like a reverent place. And it's words like this that got Jesus in a lot of trouble. If you remember at Jesus' trial, they accused him of like, it was almost terrorist plot to destroy the temple, right? Him being so flippant about that, why is that? And I think he was really trying to reorient all of our eyes to what we value in worship, what we value in ministry. And it struck me because, yes, I put a lot of pride in the work of what we do here at Harvest. Sometimes I work in anxiety and fear over our mission here and if we're doing it well enough. And if we're really glorifying God as much as we're supposed to do. But what I get lost in is that my work here, our work here, is not the totality of God's mission on earth. God's kingdom does not live and die on what we do. And that can be a freeing thing, but it's also a humbling thing because it is a struggle when we kind of see things so myopically as if we're all that's left. I think Jesus brings things into a more purposeful scope that is bigger than just the building. It's bigger than just what goes on here, but it is the message. It is the gospel. That is what is at stake, what is most important, what must go on. But if we were to read verses 3 to 23, he says we're correct to mourn when things like losses of buildings happen, when the loss of a dream happens, when ministries crumble and fail, when pastors we've looked up to, when their ministry falls apart by great sin, when great organizations that have done so much work and so much good fall apart, when relationships break, when dear loved ones move away. We're right to mourn losses. I think of even in terms of the building example, about 5 years ago or so, there was a fire on the roof of the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. And that was really kind of distressing. It's this old, beautiful, wonderful building with wonderful stones that caught fire. In many ways, it's a jewel of Western Europe, right? And the thought of that being lost was horrifying. But there are greater things than these old buildings. When you think about something like Notre Dame, in a place that has so far moved beyond the church and moved away from the church, in that sense, it's just a building. What is more important is that the vibrancy of the proclamation of the gospel is still there. And that emphasis of what we really should value and preserve is why it's important for Christ to then move to talking about when he returns. Because what we are living in as we live between these two Advents, Christ first came and when he's coming again, our job here is not just to be building keepers and preservers of beautiful stones and beautiful works, but we are preserving something that will remain no matter what, that will not tarnish the way the rest of the world will. God's word stands. Heaven and earth will pass away, he says in verse 31. But my words will not pass away. Christians, we have the word of Christ with us now, and it will outlive every one of us. This is hard for us to believe if you don't really believe the first part of the wonderful things fading in time. If you don't believe even your false temples will fade, if you don't believe that the things you falsely worship will fade, it's going to be hard to really believe that Christ's word stands forever, that his words will outlast and ultimately be proven true. But it's all the more important when you do feel that frailty of the world we live in, and to know that in Christ and his words you are kept, you are secure. In an ever-changing world, to know that Christ is constant and that his word is changeless, that should be a great comfort to us. That can be difficult as everything around us changes, but God's word remains. And that will keep us, as we saw in our assurance today, keep us to the very end, keep us to the day of Christ, that time when he returns, as it says, in power and glory. So the things of this earth that we wonder at and marvel at ultimately will fade. What things are unfading and unchanging? It is the wonder of Christ, the glory of the Son of Man. He says in verse 24, then, really kind of get into the rest of our passage properly. After those days, that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light. Now, quickly, just speaking, I think, to the different readings of this passage, because this could be a way of saying, well, these days must be all close to each other, because it says after those days, and that tribulation we're talking about, so we must be talking about some future event. Well, as I said, people who view this passage as completely history in the past, and people who view it as completely in the future would link these two together. But I think I'm more persuaded as this having the appearance of mountain peaks. If you've ever been hiking in the mountains, you might get to one peak, and then look just across the way, just scan straight forward and see a peak that just looks like, well, if I could just walk through the air, I'd just be there in about a half hour. But in actuality, to get down from that mountain and then walk all the way up to the other one, it's a huge distance. As if you could raise that valley up, that space would show how much greater is apart. So when he's saying after those days, it's that same kind of mountain week separation. As you might hear in a class, we're going to have a midterm, and after that we're having a final. It's not that the final and the midterm are a day apart. That would be terrifying. But there's time stretched between. We're thinking in God's time, as he is saying, even the angels don't know. We're acknowledging things in God's time and that mystery. The destruction of the temple and his parousia, his appearing again, might look right next to each other in this passage, but there's a gulf of time between them, and between those two events is where we live. In that valley is where you are right now. And he sends, almost as if we're thinking about we're climbing the mountain upwards towards Christ coming again. There are signs of that happening. And this is where he gets into these really horrifying, cosmic, upheaval kind of language. The stars falling down from heaven, the powers of the heavens being shaken. It is the whole earth quaking. Why? It's because of these wars, because of what man is doing. No, it is the arrival, not of two kings warring armies, but of the one and only true King of Kings, arriving with his heavenly host. It is a sign of Jesus coming again, but in a much different manner than when he first came. Now, the interesting thing I was thinking about, I was studying this. I'm like, okay, this is about Jesus' return, Jesus' return. But the funny thing is, our passage here doesn't say Jesus returns. It is saying that, don't worry. But what it is saying is, what's it saying? In those days, you will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. Jesus is using his words very specifically, this arrival of the Son of Man with power and glory. What is the Son of Man? It is a reference that Jews would have known very well to Daniel 7. This vision that Daniel had of a Son of Man. I saw in the night visions, behold, with clouds of heaven, there came one like a Son of Man, and came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that which will not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. That is the kingdom, the reign of the Son of Man, who is Jesus Christ. And when he returns with that power. He returns with that glory. Similarly, I hear that about his reign, about his dominion, what he is getting, what is being bestowed on him, and think of another actually famous Christmas passage of Isaiah 9, where it says, "For to us a child is born." Yeah, we think of this as a first Advent language, his first coming. Oh, a child has been born. To us a son is given. But what is the rest of it? What is being given to this child, this infant in a manger? What is being given to him? The government upon his shoulder. His name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end. On the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and uphold it with justice, with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts, the Lord of armies, will do this. Between these two arrivals is where we live. But what we are learning about who Jesus is, it's not simply that this cute little baby in a manger, the son of a carpenter, but who he is. He's the Son of Man, the creator of all things come to earth. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. That's who that is. And when he comes again, he doesn't come as an infant in a manger. He comes with power and with glory to show his authority over all things. That's what we're supposed to wonder at, marvel at, be in awe over. Not great human buildings and establishments, but be awed at what he is coming to do. He will appear as that kind of great and powerful ruler, someone you can't actually believe you're seeing in the flesh. You know, if you've ever seen a celebrity or seen someone you've always just, seen on your phone before, right? You might think, wow, they're actually shorter than I imagined. I had no idea they were actually as tall as that. There's no expectation met when we finally behold the Son of Man coming in clouds of glory. When you read passages of this kind of arrival, the prophets don't really know how to describe it. Ezekiel describes the voice of God like the sound of rushing water. In Revelation, John sees Christ walking, and again, his voice is like rushing water. I mean, think of a waterfall. Have you ever stood right next to a waterfall pouring loudly over the rocks? It's like white noise. Your ears cannot understand what's going on. It's so thunderous and mighty and powerful. And to describe God's voice like that, it's like your brain is unequipped to take in that power, take in that glory. When we talk about our Advent season now, consider also the second Advent, the Advent we're looking towards, not looking back towards. Consider what Jesus is coming again to do. And it says to gather the elect from the four winds. This is really interesting. It's not so much that he's gathering the elect, but where he's gathering the elect from. He's talking to his disciples, right? These good, fervent, reverent Jewish men who are so proud of the jewel of their place of worship, the temple. And he's saying, he's going to gather the elect. And to the Jewish mind, the elect, the chosen, right? The chosen, who's that? The Jewish people, and just them. But to say, no, they're going to be from all over. Four winds, to the ends of the earth. What did we just talk about last week in Acts? The gospel going to the ends of the earth. All nations and all peoples. When Christ returns to gather as a as a harvest to gather his people. It's from all over the place. He's challenging even the Jews to say, like, look, I know this temple is beautiful and it's important, but this is not the whole picture. Jesus is saying, what I've come to do in this first advent is to save all peoples of the world, of every corner. And when I return and gather them all back to dwell with me forever, in all wonder and power, I do so because I have the authority over all the earth. Let us not lose our wonder at that. This is something wondrous, something amazing, that we aren't confined to one place to find God, as if we have to travel to a certain location to meet with God. But his domain is over all the earth. And the amazing thing is we're part of that mission of the elect going to all corners of the earth, because it is his dominion. We are called to go out, as we've been talking through Acts, and now as we look forward to when he returns. The command here is quite clear, I would say. It's always nice preaching when you have a passage that, like Jesus himself is saying, do this like 3 times in a row. It's the same command. That's kind of nice for application, right? When Jesus is very clearly like, hey, stay awake. Okay, try. Stay awake. Be on guard. Keep awake. You do not know when he will come. Again in verse 37, I will say to you all, stay awake. What are we on guard for? That's, I think, where this gets tricky. And again, I think where people like debate what Jesus is talking about here. Like, are the disciples going to live? Are they part of this generation that won't pass away? And are they going to see all the events? That means it has to be in the history. But if it's all for the future, then why is he talking to his disciples about that if they won't live to see it? This is why this passage is difficult, right? But truly, I believe he's talking about this future generation that honestly, I don't know if we're included in it or not, because we don't know the day or the hour. Regardless, because he says in that context, you don't know the day or the hour, so stay awake. We don't get the benefit of being able to chart out and know if the words stay awake and stay regard are applicable to us or not. Regardless of that, stay awake. He has given us a duty. It is like a man going on a journey when he leaves home, puts the servants in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to stay awake. He tells the guard to do that, to watch for these signs. But what is he entrusted with? What are we guarding? We're here to guard the words of Christ. Now, of course, whether we do a good job or not, his words will persevere. But he has left us with his word. And so it is our duty to proclaim it, to speak it with boldness, to see it go to all peoples, and stay awake to it, to listen to it, to have our ears open to it. His words will not pass away, so I think we should give it good and careful attention, should we not? We're to watch the church of Christ too, as part of his elect people. Be on guard and keep the church pure, keep out heresy and division, calling others to stay awake as well, bringing others in with that message of wonder of what Christ has done. Almost as if, if you've ever come back from a concert and just wanting to tell someone about how amazing it was, and your words can barely describe it, and your terrible little phone footage of it doesn't do justice, but you still want to show it to them because it was so amazing. You want to share with them your wonder, because it's keeping you awake at night just thinking through that. That is what we're supposed to carry with us. The wonder of what Christ has done, and the wonder of how he will return, and the manner that he will return. But do you realize how, he says stay awake, keep on guard, several times. I wonder why. I think it's pretty clear, to be honest. Because we very easily fall asleep, don't we? We are weak, and we fall asleep to the wonder, the power, and the glory. When he says keep awake, I have to imagine a connection between that and the Garden of Gethsemane when he's like, can you just pray and stay awake? And they can't even do that. It's the same kind of word of being on guard and staying awake that they fail to do. We get lulled to sleep, don't we? Even now, in this moment maybe. lulled to sleep by the pale imitations of God's wonder that are here on earth, right? The temple was man straining at God's glory, and it was beautiful. But to be lulled to sleep as if that captures his glory, I mean, you're just dreaming then. Where are you getting lost along the way, lulled to sleep by the beauty and wonder of this earth, as if imagining that these things capture the beauty of God, the beauty and wonder of others, of others' affirmation of you and appreciation of you, getting lost in the lustful infatuation in the person rather than the reverence of the Creator God, getting lost and immune to the comfort and the joys of the world around that just pull you further and further away from God, lulled to sleep by the constant scrolling of images and entertainment on your phone that keep your brain from really considering or observing anything. We talk about how many distractions there are in this world, but if anything, there's so much that hypnotizes us away from actually stopping and marveling at our Savior. So as we recall then that first advent, that first coming of the Son of God, let's take a moment and have our wonder at what he will come again to do. Let's look back as well to the wonder of the Son of Man coming to earth in the appearance of weakness in order to die for our weak flesh to give us new hearts. Marvel and wonder at what he's doing in your life until he comes in all power and glory. Why do we have to look back at that first advent? Why don't we just keep on going, keeping awake for that second advent? Because I think that first advent tells us a lot. First, not just by what Jesus is coming back again to resolve, to finish, but what he first started. We might get lost and lulled to sleep by the cute and cuddly baby we think of Jesus in the manger. It might help us stay awake a little bit. To remember that our King has already come. And that his work on that first arrival is what he came to do, to save us, to die on the cross for our sins. We aren't waiting for salvation to come and get started already. It has begun. It has been declared to you. And it's what he did on the cross that day, and our faith in that, faith that it truly happened, faith that it truly matters to your life today. That's what saves us. It's not whatever charts and red string that we read through the Bible and try to determine the day or the hour of when he's coming back. That's not what saves us. What saves us is what he did back then. When he comes again, he establishes then and finishes that judgment. We must stay awake until then, understanding and focusing and dwelling on what he came to do. The amazing story about Christ's coming at Christmas is interesting, but I don't believe we'll actually meet Jesus in that form. Right? We'll never actually behold him as this tender infant, meek and mild. The way we will behold Jesus is this Son of Man coming in power and glory. Think of that, riding on the clouds. And yet, what irony then, as we're talking about the wonder, what are we to wonder and be amazed at? How did this amazing, all-powerful God and creator of all things choose to come to earth the first time in a way that subverts everything we think about what true power and glory is? You know, the arrival of a triumphant king, that's how he will return the second time. But how he came the first time is this weak child, scared and weak in a manger, in a food trough, born into poverty, and lifted up, not on a king's litter, carried through the streets, but lifted up on a cross, told to carry that cross for himself. Anointed with a crown, not of gold and jewels, but a crown of thorns. That's how the Son of Man came with power and glory the first time. He came in power and glory, but it was shielded from us because we'd much rather prefer the man-made ways of power and glory. But he came to show us what he was willing to put aside so that you would be saved, so that you would be considered the elect, spread apart to the four winds. When we behold him in hope and we behold him in love and wonder because we understand how he came the first time. We understand he came in weakness and the futility of this flesh so that ours would be saved. So let us come and gather and recall that, what he came to do, what he came to begin at that first Advent. That on the night when Jesus was to be betrayed, he took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you." In the same way, after the supper, he took the cup and said, this cup is the blood of the new covenant, which is shed for you for the remission of sins. So Christians know this. As often as you eat this bread and you drink this blood, you are proclaiming Christ's death until he comes again. Let us continue to feast at this table. We come to this table by what markers? Not by being a member of Harvest Church of Madison or the PCA. We come to this table just by being baptized believers, professing Christians, baptized in the waters, carried here to profess what Christ has done. That we know and profess this is what happened at Christ's first arrival, and we look forward to in faith when he comes again. Let these elements here keep us awake. Let me pray for this.